scaffolding is what students are doing to help them learn that content. The activities and procedures that help them more readily access it on their own and help them access it through the bulk of the intellectual work through their own intellectual knowledge. So let's talk about my really special and wonderful teaching audience. I taught at Boston Lad Academy. It's a highly diverse public exam school in Boston that is grades 7 through 12. A public exam school means that students in Boston have the opportunity to take the IC, which is a private school admissions exam. And if they score high enough, they're invited to enter one of the exam schools based on a combination of their scores and their grades in elementary school. I taught 2 classes of 26 and 25 students respectively. I was teaching actually an 8th grade civics curriculum, which is a combination of American history, government, and politics, and due to a new law in Massachusetts, is going to be the major 8th grade curriculum from now on in the state. I have 4 total students with IEP or 504 plans across both classes. And I think this shows that you can be both smart and have an IEP or 504 and still succeed at a place like DLL. And finally, there were no current DLL students, but there were many flex students in my classes. And the more I sort of look back on it, there were many students who could probably have benefited from more structured DLL support in the classroom school in general. So I began my research project on this question with a student survey. I asked 5 pretty broad open response questions as a pre-assessment. I focused on how asking students about how film could be used to support their learning. Styles and strategies, mainly. So, do you prefer narrative versus documentary film? Do you think we should stop and start the film? Do you think we should have subtitles and other ways to both provide content and scaffolding? And when I looked over the answers, I found 2 major dichotomies that really sort of interested me in the research. The first was narrative fiction films versus documentaries. Many students really liked watching fiction movies, historical fiction, fantasy even, and they believed that these films were useful because they had a hook. They were enjoyable to watch and to be part of their curriculum. And then other students said that documentaries were a really useful part of their learning because they helped them see things in the real world and engage with the experiences of others. And then there was the issue of scaffolding the work versus enjoyment or experience of the film. So because film is often viewed as a low engagement activity, I looked at the activities you might be doing as, for example, a long expedition, a big worksheet where there's lots of questions that students could answer to help them keep engaged and reflect on the film. However, many of my students obviously said, we just want to watch the film, we just want to listen to it and enjoy it. Of course, there needs to be a happy medium between scaffold activities and just enjoying the film with a bag of popcorn. So I developed several activities over the course of the year that took all of these wonderings and responses into account. And I'm going to highlight a few of them specifically here. The first one was about the Flint water crisis and was to help students understand political platforms about clean water from both the Democratic and Republican parties. And to help scaffold the content of this video, we gave them the infamous T-chart, which, as you can see, is a big chart with 2 columns. One says what I see, and the other says reactions. And in this column, they write down exactly what it says, what they see, the details of the information in the movie or film. And over here, they write down the reactions, the sort of proto-analysis of what they're going to talk about in a discussion or activity. And this was useful. Students really engaged with it, and they wrote down a lot, but when I was looking through the worksheets, the reactions were sort of vague. They were sort of like, this is sad, this is bad, oh God, why are these people being sent off to jail? And I thought about this, and I'm like, maybe there's a better way for students to be using film in the classroom that's not just to gain content knowledge to help them do an activity afterwards. So then I went on and continued working on film as purely a scaffold, as simply a way for students to help gain a foothold into the content. We had a big immigration unit in my civics classroom, and I wanted to talk to them about how immigration history is American history. And to do that, I found this wonderful poem called Alibanza in Praise of Local 100, which is about the lives of immigrant restaurant workers who died during the 9/11 terrorist attacks while working at the Windows on the World restaurant at the top of town. And it's a really complex poem. It has wordplay, it has sort of almost a song-like quality to it. It has words in Spanish with it. And I thought, how can I help my students really get into the experience of reading this poem? So I went online, I Googled around, and I found a wonderful video, which unfortunately is a little too long to show to you all, of Martin Espada, the poet, reading his poem aloud and bringing so much more richness of verbal experience to this poem. And, it brought out the song-like quality, it brought out the different changes in register that he was using, and it helped my students so much with the discussion of this poem that at the end one of them said to me, "This is my new favorite poem." And then I began to think, how could I bring both scaffolding and content together to allow my students to learn with film and learn from film? So I set up a Socratic seminar based on a video from Channel 5 News in Boston about Ayanna Pressley, the congressperson for most of Boston, presenting a bill in Congress to lower the federal voting age to 16, which was, of course, incredibly applicable to my students. And they all watched the video not only to see what it was about, but to see people on different sides of the debate about lowering the federal voting age discuss with each other and what arguments they could make and how they interacted. And because they saw these discussions, my students were able to talk on both sides and bring up really strong ideas and use talk moves and sentence starters to really express what they're trying to say, interact in the conversation with the work of their peers. So then I did the analysis. I am not a numbers person. You will not see fun and cool graphs from me. So it was all qualitative data, and I went at it like I would with my film text. It was a textual approach. I read through my notes, I thought about what I had seen, and I analyzed it like a social text. What are my students doing, what am I doing to help support their learning? And I came up with three pretty simple but very powerful conclusions. The first conclusion, film and media can be used as both scaffolding content, and sometimes they're the same thing in an activity. And maybe the content that I was trying to bring in at the very beginning with that T-chart was also a form of scaffolding because it supported my students' learning in future activities. Students learn best when they use teacher-provided models to do the bulk of intellectual work on their own, as shown in the voting age discussion. So when students are shown what to do and how to do it, they are able to take those models and really shine in activities where they're on their own. And these supports make their learning richer and your teaching practice more powerful. And finally, my teaching should continue to be interactive and student-centric. I should always make sure my students are doing things that are hands-on and doing things that affect their lives. And that is the central reason I'm trying to bring film into the classrooms in a way that is interactive and student-centric. So my next steps are many. The civics curriculum in Massachusetts involves media literacy. Usually that's done at the very beginning of the curriculum. But given that I hopefully have my own civics classroom someday, I hope to use some of these techniques to help teach media literacy and bring together scaffolding, how to look at film and how to interact in the classroom and how to look at the information that the media presents to us. So thank you very much.
So did you do this with mostly nonfiction clips and movies, or was it like, did you include any fictional things to see?
So one of the activities I did talk about was a vaguely fictional text I used. Has anyone seen that little PBS show Liberty's Kids about the American Revolution? I showed them a clip from that show about the Articles of Confederation. But again, that was very much historical content, social studies content, civics content in a fictional package. But most of the work based on the responses was from nonfiction sources. Please.
Can you talk a little bit about the expectations for the students in terms of like behavior and participation during the movie? Like, did you have them all, for example, like sitting in their desks to watch? Were they able to kind of have flexible seating, or what was that? Just I'm thinking about them being engaged in a longer movie or a shorter film, or.
So students were always at their desks, and most of the clips, with one major exception, were always short and integrated into the content of the class. So we did show them a very long documentary called Exodus about the Syrian refugee crisis, which is a very moving and powerful work if you haven't seen it. And that was sort of where this idea of scaffolding, not content, was really apparent as well. You know, they were just sitting there for 3 days watching this film and just taking key-sharp notes, and I thought we could do a lot better in how we integrate the work into the classroom. Jeff?
Yeah, I was wondering, I assume, you know, in scaffolding techniques, you're using skills they can draw from films, but also use that when applied to reading and other activities. Can you speak more to that?
Most certainly. And one of the big things in the discussion was these are argumentation skills and discussion skills they can use about talking about reading. They can do it talking about pictures. They can do it talking about sound. And maybe even bringing those all together in the content of a news clip, how to practice all these skills in both a visual, oral, and pictographic way. Okay then.
So does somebody have a program saying when we really start back before we all? Doesn't say. So the only thing to say is that since we're done, the folks in the other 2 rooms might not be. So I would suggest if you want to get out of this stuffy room, I'd suggest going back to the big room where you can sing, dance, converse. Sing and dance. That's good. 11:30.
So like this ceremony. How do I turn this off?
I know.